how did you end up where you are in Australia?
Joined the Navy, nuclear electronics technician, served on a couple of submarines, made it up to the rank of chief petty officer, and then I decided that having my spine was an optional thing. So I had my spine removed and got my commission. You can actually see my commissioning certificate right behind me.
Describe what the difference between the UBH and what AUKUS, what are those two of the same entities?
UBH is the only organization in Australia with this certification.
Can you speak to future opportunities for people that have a background in the United States, whether in the nuclear navy or not, possibly coming over to Australia in that process if they were interested in becoming a part of this whole vision that Australia, United States, United Kingdom is coming up with and being a part of that effort?
So there are lots of opportunities here because Australia recognizes they don't have the people with the knowledge.
The AUKUS partnership is one of the most ambitious defense collaborations of our time. Spelled AUKUS, AUKUS brings together Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States to deliver nuclear-powered submarines and reshape the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. But building submarines is only part of the story.
To actually support and sustain these submarines, Australia needs to build up its nuclear supply chain, workforce, and infrastructure from the ground up. That's where today's guest comes in. Mark Schneider is the Chief Nuclear Officer at UBH Group, an Australian veteran-owned company that just became the first in the Southern Hemisphere to earn the ISO 19443 certification, which is basically the gold standard for working in the nuclear industry.
And here's the wild part. Mark started as a Navy nuke. He spent over 20 years in nuclear operations with the U.S. Navy before making the leap to move across the world to Australia. Now, he's helping lead the country's nuclear transformation under the AUKUS program.
From reactor safety and maintenance support to solving problems like radioactive waste management, Mark is at the center of building Australia's nuclear future. His story is proof that your time in the Navy nuclear program can open doors way beyond what most people expect, even global ones.
So whether you're still on active duty or already thinking about your next chapter, this episode is packed with insight into what's possible when you put your nuclear experience to work.
Let's get into it.
Hello, how are you all doing? My name is Caleb Stewart, here with Justin Woodall, and we're sitting here with Mark Schneider. He's a guest of ours. We're very excited to talk to him. He's had a lot of experience, both in the military and a lot of civilian experience out of the military. Just like you heard from our intro, we're going to go into depth and discuss some of his experience, specifically talk about the current program he's working with, AUKUS, describe what that is specifically when it comes to the program and the type of work that he does. So again, Mark, thanks for coming, and how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Yeah, man, we're excited to have you on.
All right, so if you were to give a very, 1,000-yard view, if someone says very generally ask you about, I'm sure, the very intrinsic program that is AUKUS, right? What would you give as an answer? What is AUKUS, Mark?
All right, so AUKUS, and the name actually tells you what it is. The A for Australia, the UK for United Kingdom, and the US for United States. It's a trilateral arrangement that has two pillars. Pillar one, which is what we're going to talk about mostly today, is nuclear submarines, upskilling Australia to nuclear submarine capabilities because they don't have that right now. And then pillar two is like a sharing of military technologies, particularly kind of rolls into the IT cyber space type things. One of the little cool things that I've gotten to be able to hear about is the ability to launch an unmanned underwater vehicle from one submarine and then capture it by another one to download data. So imagine doing data transfer between submarines underwater. So
What?
Yeah. So I just blew everyone's mind, right? Have this unmanned underwater vehicle that basically transfers from boat to boat, so it stays in theater at all times, and you never have to upload packages across a radio network.
Okay, awesome. I appreciate. So before we get, I guess, more specifically into AUKUS, if you were to just give us just a very general history of your background, your, again, military service, and then how did you end up where you are in Australia, right? We didn't mention that, and what you're doing. If you just give us your background.
Yeah, so I'm going to start at the end and say the reason I'm in Australia is because I followed a girl, which is always a fun way to put it. And then the question I usually get followed up is, did you marry an Australian? And the answer is no. And then we'll go back to the beginning. Like probably most people in the nuclear world or Navy nuclear world, I went through high school. I skipped the college phase and went right into the Navy. So right out of high school, literally 20 days after graduation, did join the Navy, nuclear electronics technician. So I was a dirty blue like everyone else. Served on a couple of submarines, made it up to the rank of chief petty officer, and then I decided that having my spine was an optional thing. So I had my spine removed and got my commission. You can actually see my commissioning certificate right behind me. So I got my commission as an LDO. I even have my Mustang belt buckle there. I went and I worked for Naval Reactors for a couple of years, and that's where I met my wife. Somewhat of a conflict with the fact that she worked for the shipyard. So I was a joint decision was made by Naval Reactors and myself to return to the fleet. So there I went to USS Abraham Lincoln, served as repair officer on there, and then I did pre-commissioning unit on the submarine Washington. So I did new construction on there, and then retired out of supervisor shipbuilding, conversion, and repair out of Newport News. I just told you I did 10 years in one shipyard in that quick little introduction. My entire time in my officer career was actually spent in one shipyard. I did go to Everett for a short while on Lincoln, but I did a total of 6 shipyard tours, so I know the pain of everyone
Wow.
doing that. So yeah, I took both my submarines in. So yeah.
So what was the total? What was it? What total amount of time and the year, the dates?
So my total time was 1998. Wow, I'm really dating myself to 2018 when I retired. I did 20 years, 4 months, and 2 days. So I did 10 years, 4 months, and 2 days enlisted. I did exactly 10 years as an officer. I retired at the earliest convenient time that I could and get my pension. And then after I retired, I wasn't done with nuclear energy at that point. So I went and I worked at Surry Power Station. So I worked at a commercial nuclear power plant. I did the job I got hired for. I was a non-licensed operator. That's the term that they use at Dominion Energy. So I was turning valves like I was back to being a blue shirt again. It was awesome. I did that for a few years, and I got kind of tired of shift work. Pandemic had hit, so I said, let me go and try to maybe go into more technical, I said not more technical, but kind of utilize the degree I'd earned. And, so I went and I submitted 200 job applications with the federal government. I got 4 interviews and 2 offers.
You said 200?
200, that's correct. 200 job applications. I applied for anything I thought I was qualified for. I used the shotgun approach, and I would rather them tell me no than I tell them no. So I got I got 4 interviews, 3 with Military Sea Lift Command, and 1 with the United States Coast Guard. And I accepted the United States Coast Guard working as a system engineer, and I started climbing the ranks within the U.S. Coast Guard to the point where I was the branch chief for long-range communication systems. So I owned all comm systems on afloat and ashore assets for the U.S. Coast Guard from a sustainment perspective.
Wow.
So I had equipment. So I'm in Perth in Western Australia, so that's all the way on the west half. And 4 hours north of me is Exmouth, and I had equipment when I worked for the Coast Guard that was in Exmouth, which is, on the other side of the hemisphere because it's based out of Portsmouth. My wife got the opportunity to come out to support AUKUS, and then she asked if I would. My initial response was, "There's no expletive way that's happening," and 5 days later, things changed, and here's where I am. I ended up getting hired with UBH Group. UBH, prior to me even getting out here, had started down the path of getting their nuclear supply chain certification, ISO 19443, and so they had basically the license to operate from a supply chain perspective, and I came in with the understanding and ability to speak with authority for them.
Nice. So where you are right now, describe like what the difference between like the UBH and what AUKUS, like what are those two the same entities, or you work one or the other? Like what's the deal with that?
That's a great question that we're going to talk about the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Act and the regulations. So UBH is the only company in Australia, or the only organization in Australia with this certification. And the way the law is written is you have to follow international best practices. International best practices, as defined by the Australian law, is the International Atomic Energy Agency requirements. So IAEA has tons and tons of documents that describe safety things. They're called safety standards. There's specific and there's general ones. And then specifically when you get into general safety requirement part 2, talks about supply chain. And A lot of companies, even in the US, use ISO 9001, which is a general quality management system. But if you take that, you upgrade that to a nuclear capability through what is in the IAEA standards, you get ISO 19443. So the only way to show compliance with Australian law through the international best practices and the requirements of ISO of General Safety Requirement Part 2, there's no certification other than ISO 19443. You have to work either be certified with ISO 19443 or work under an ISO 19443 certification certified company. And then specifically in the regulations, they have something called the Nuclear Safety Management System, and it reiterates the international requirements. And specifically, there's 10 required documents that have to be in that, and part 3 is the supply chain management system. And so in order to support any license holder that supports the AUKUS work, any regulated activity, you have to be able to demonstrate compliance with their supply chain management system.
See, a little bit of a word salad there, a lot of
Yeah.
regulations and
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of stuff
so
there. A lot of
if
stuff
you
to
were
unpack.
to yeah, if you were to kind of equate kind of what you're doing as far as the regulatory side to maybe an entity or something that exists over, let's say over, naval reactors, would that be like the equal equivalent or, just with your experience, obviously you've had experience, on
Yeah,
both sides.
it's an interesting concept because the U.S. Navy program is a little different because it stood up over 70 years ago. So really, when we're talking a supply chain program, this is say HII, Huntington Ingalls Industries. They manage their own supply chain, so they have a program established to certify their suppliers, right? The people that come in and conduct work, right? Like going to get your badge, right? There are certain aspects you have to do to step foot on board the shipyard. Um, if you've ever worked at Newport News Shipbuilding, they talk about WIN, right? You see a bag of unattended radioactive material, you have to warn others, isolate, and notify, right? So
Hmm.
that is covered under HII's version of a nuclear safety management system. So Australia doesn't have any of this, the skills and capabilities. So they can't just go out and just do this. And so that's where this international best practice comes in, is it's a gap filler until those license holders can really develop the skills. When you're talking in like supply chain components, right? HII has, where does their steel come from? Where do the components come from? Their paint, all that stuff to meet all those mill standard requirements. So they have a program that exists that has existed since they started building aircraft carriers, surface ships, and submarines in the 1950s, right? Whereas Australia doesn't have that program. And so that's where ISO 19443 is a gap filler until the license holders in Australia can get up to speed on that. And as nuclear safety management systems are built out, if Mark Schneider was writing them, I would say 19443 is mandatory plus an audit to meet that nuclear safety management system, which is compliant with ISO 19443, by the way. And then over time, there would be like an intermediate step where if you've shown compliance with the license holder's nuclear safety management system and held the ISO 19443 certification, you can receive a certification to this license. And then 10 years down the line, they can just issue certifications against that license because it takes a good long time to get those skills to be able to do that. So it's really ISO 19443 is mandatory in the beginning, but over time will phase off, meaning that the international certification will be mandatory in the beginning, and then long term it will go to Australian sovereign entities providing that certification. Does that answer where you're going?
No, definitely. Yeah. Essentially, Australia has no obviously history of operating, nuclear submarines, right? So this is initially all the regulations and the specific detailing of the building, like literally the foundation of their program. There's just going to be a whole much more red tape than it would be for us, since we've as a program been operating for decades. So no, that definitely makes a lot of sense. So just kind of talk about the infancy, right, of the Australian, nuclear program. What would you or I guess highlight when it comes to like the importance of, obviously trilateral, right? So Australia, the UK, and the US. Between those, three entities, what importance would you highlight when it comes to AUKUS as a program?
Yeah, well, that's a lot to unpack there. So you mentioned infancy, and that is the key point of this, is that while Australia has one medical isotope reactor, It's a very different way to operate a medical isotope reactor. So you're talking small uranium pile, big pool of water. If you lose power, shuts down, right? Very simple. Like there's so much water in there, probably wouldn't even boil it. Like the water would get warm before the residual heat was gone. Obviously, compare that to a submarine where a relatively large pile of uranium in a small pool of water changes that safety mindset and that safety understanding and that safety culture. And that's probably the big thing from an Australian perspective is the UK and the US bringing that nuclear safety culture, right? One of the big things is that I mentioned, the unattended radioactive material. Um, we are it's so ingrained in us, right? If you're on board a shipyard, if you're at the pier, if you see a bag of yellow poly, right, you're calling that away. You know how to do that. Well, I did an event last week in the city of Coburn. By the way, if you look that up, the spelling of it will make you giggle and laugh. Um,
Take
uh,
note.
yeah. So the city of Coburn, I was speaking to an economic advisory council, and I was speaking on the law, the regulations, and ISO 19443, how they all fit together, right? They're all interrelated. And I had my nuclear safety standards book from Dominion Energy, because if I needed extra time, I was going to read some statements out of it. And I literally tossed it on the ground and I said, imagine that is unattended radioactive material. And Betty, the food truck driver, is on that site and she walks up to that. What does she do? I go, she has action she has to take. And in accordance with the law, Part 14B1, that's a regulated activity because she is in control or in possession of NNP material because it produces ionizing radiation, right? So from that perspective, right, even the food truck driver has to think of nuclear safety. It is in our culture in the United States. I had a friend of mine that's from Australia that he came out to the United States, and I coordinated with him getting a tour of Surry Power Station. And the way he described it, he goes, nuclear safety, it's not like oxygen because oxygen seems too external. It's like it's in their DNA. Like from our perspective, nuclear safety is so ingrained in us, we don't realize it. Like it's just constantly in everything we do, and that's probably the biggest thing that Australia needs is to figure out how to, how do I start with, it external and then start to internalize it. I think that's the big thing that the U.S. and the U.K. can bring to Australia.
It's like building a whole culture around it.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a perfect way of putting it.
A few times, a little earlier, that you kept referring back to nuclear management systems. That's what UBH handles, right?
We are certified with ISO 19443, which would be if you go through the 10 items that are in the draft regulations for a nuclear safety management system, that would cover part of part 3. Now,
Mhm.
when you look at what ISO 19443 requires from it, you have to be compliant with the customer's requirements, right? So in order for me to conduct work as a certified company in that supply chain, I have to be compliant with every aspect of that nuclear safety management system. If Mark gets his way, he's going to write the nuclear safety management system for every license holder in Australia. So that way it would be relatively standardized, right? So that, much like for the Navy nukes out there, the engineering department manual is the standard document for every nuclear warship in the United States Navy. And then you have the EDOM for the different classes of submarines. And then you have I can't remember the carrier's equivalent, but you'd have something that takes that base document and adds to it. I would like to build a nuclear safety management system that is a base, so for each of the license holders. So this is the base document that, say, Osborne Shipyard has, and this is the base document that HMAS Sterling, the West Coast base, has, and they have to follow all those required lines, but then there may be specific actions for Osborne that would not apply to Sterling and vice versa. So that way it's standard so that if I, as a supplier, or say someone else's supplier comes in and they want to provide gloves, like RADCON gloves, to both of those entities, they know that they're compliant completely with one because they're already on Osborne and they're going to go upskill to Sterling. They just have to upskill the differences, right? So that 99% of the document's the same. They're just worried about that small 1%. So they can meet their customers' requirements, which is a requirement by the international standards.
So the management system is you're talking about like building like a database software that can do all these things you're talking about, or are we talking more like pen and paper, black and white, manual type stuff?
It would be both. So it would
Mhm.
so it's part of there's several actions that have to go into applying for a license, in Australia.
Yeah.
And one of the items is the nuclear safety management system with 10 required documents. So one of the great things that UBH does is that I would build that program on paper. And then I have a program called Agility that we're partnered with, where I could take that paper and make it into a visual document that you can incorporate in. And the other thing is my company has a secure AI chat that I can take, say, a company's statement of work into a nuclear safety management system, and it will spit out, you have to comply with part one of the nuclear safety management system, these 4 items, part 2, these items, part 3. And so it builds basically what you as a company need to upskill to, right? Betty the food truck driver.
That's what I was getting at. I was
Yeah,
wondering if that was gonna be how it operated, because that would
yeah,
make it a lot easier.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So the idea is that not everyone needs to be compliant with every aspect of the nuclear safety management system, right? Part 8 of that document is the emergency management program, right? Emergency response program, right? HMAS Sterling has the city of Rockingham, which is right next to it. If there is a fire on board the pier or the submarine that exceeded the capabilities of the on-station fire department, the city of Rockingham has responses they have to do to support that. Well, they have to meet the standards because they're going to be potentially doing regulated work because they may get contaminated. That's NMP material. But Betty the food truck driver has different responsibilities in accordance with that, right? So where the fire trucks are going to go into the danger, Betty the food truck driver is going to evacuate, maybe, right? If Betty the food truck driver is potentially contaminated, she will have to go to a muster location. That's a term they use all over Australia, which is great because other services
We
don't know
know
the
that.
term muster. But yeah, so they'll go to a muster location to ensure that they're not contaminated, and then would evacuate from there. So understanding that different depending on your role, you're gonna have different compliance requirements with that system.
Yeah, so that's awesome and very interesting. So you mentioned earlier a little bit about like building culture and instilling kind of what we already have ingrained in us as far as Navy nuclear operators into sailors, right? Eventually in the Royal Australian Navy. So my experience, at least in my first time hearing about AUKUS, was actually as a staff member here at NNPTC in Goose Creek, South Carolina, right? Where we actually started receiving, no longer there, but a little over a year ago, right? Started receiving and training, Australian sailors, and their rate specific knowledge, and going on to power school, essentially just sending them through the same pipeline where we all trained at. And I understand, right, that eventually, right, they're going to obviously be operating. As well. So if you can kind of speak to obviously these things when it comes to especially shipbuilding can take a whole bunch of time. But I know right now we're training sailors. Where is the program at currently? And then you can go how far off, I guess, would you say are we from, actually having, an Australian nuclear powered submarine being able to be operated and serving missions?
Yeah, it's a great question. So AUKUS Pillar 1 is divided into 3 different phases. So phase 1, which is the as the as the Aussies would say, the crocodile closest to the canoe, which is known as SRF West or Submarine Rotation Force West. So in this case, it's going to be U.S. flagged and U.K. flagged submarines. It's supposed to be 4 and 1, 4 U.S., 1 U.K. submarine that will essentially be based out of HMAS Sterling, and they will be conducting maintenance availabilities. And that's supposed to commence in 2027. That's to help get the maintenance workforce up to skill, right? We all know the crawl, walk, run phase of training, right? This is we come in, the first time you do the maintenance, it's going to be, a bunch of American and UK experts with Aussies working behind them, right? The next time it may be the Aussie doing the work with the UK or US expert over their shoulder. We'll do that a couple iterations, and then probably eventually the Aussies will have the appropriate skill sets to do that. So that's the first phase. The second phase which is supposed to commence 2032, is the transfer of 3 nuclear submarines up to 5 nuclear submarines, Virginia class, from the U.S. to Australia. 2 used submarines, I believe, and this changes, so don't quote me on this forever. But currently, it's USS Oregon and USS Vermont, SSN 793 and SSN 792 will be the first to be delivered with one new construction boat, and then there's an option to get two additional. Obviously, the U.S. shipbuilding efforts will impact the fourth and fifth, but that would provide Australia with nuclear submarines to be flagged by Australia. And that's where a lot of the work that's going on in Goose Creek at NNPTC and NPTU will be impactful. And then the fourth bay, and that's 2032. And then in the 2030s, they're hoping to start commencing construction of SSN AUKUS. SSN AUKUS is a joint venture between the United Kingdom and Australia for a common submarine design between the two nations. So it'd be one submarine class. I believe right now the Royal Navy is going to build 12, and depending on how many how many Virginia class boats the Royal Australian Navy gets, it could be anywhere between 3 to 5 to maybe even more SSN AUKUS.
All right, so you just mentioned a real extended kind of timeline, and eventually the building of submarines over in Australia and those being operated. Can you kind of speak to the potential of possible U.S. flag submarines being built over in Australia?
Yeah, so the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Act actually has a provision in there for providing regulatory oversight for the construction of U.S. and U.K. submarines in Australia for delivery to either the U.K. or the U.S. So there is a potential for that, meaning that, you know, say at Osborne Shipyard, which is the shipbuilding shipyard here, it's in South Australia. Yeah, South Australia. Sorry, the states get a little confusing. Um, in South Australia, they could build, say, an SSN AUKUS for Australia, and then the next submarine that comes out could be a Virginia class submarine for the United States, followed by an SSN AUKUS for the United Kingdom. Now, with that, the way the regulation state is that that would be a regulated activity and fall under their regulations, right? Whereas work that goes on inside of a U.S. flag submarine is not regulated by the regulator. I mean, which makes sense. That's U.S. or U.K. sovereign territory. So we're not going to regulate say we meaning Australia is not going to regulate the work that United States Navy sailors and their contractors do inside of that submarine, because that would be regulated by naval reactors.
That makes a lot of sense. See, my kind of thought immediately goes to what would be the, I guess, outside of it being just a cool opportunity, right? If I was someone who could go over and support, a sub being built in Australia, I would volunteer for that opportunity. But what would be, I guess, the benefit of building over there, vice just building over here in the U.S. If you could, think of one.
Yeah, well, this is one of the big ones that I talk about frequently here, and that is we have our two nuclear ship builders in the United States with General Dynamics and their shipyard and electric boat, which is, their major focus is Columbia class, right? So they build SSBNs, and as a side gig, they build fast attack submarines, right? So their side gig is fast boats. And then you go to our other shipyard, which is HII's Huntington Ingalls Industries Shipyard, Newport News Shipbuilding, which builds, overhauls, and decommissions our nuclear powered aircraft carriers, and then as a very small side gig, builds Virginia class submarines. So from an arrangement, if we had a shipyard that was a third nuclear capable shipyard that was dedicated to building SSNs, fast attack submarines, it could be in a foreign country, but it would help alleviate some of the strain that is on the shipbuilding efforts. Right now, the U.S. is supposed to be churning out, I think, 2.5 submarines a year, and the best we're getting to is about 1.8. So we are falling behind in our submarine construction of the United States, and this is an opportunity for Australia to, say, help the United States pick up the slack. A lot of times I brief this to Australia and saying, listen, the U.S. needs Australia more than you think. Early on, it's very much Australia needs the U.S., but later on, the U.S. is going to need Australia more than I think the United States believes.
Can you speak to future opportunities for people that have a background in the United States, whether in the nuclear navy or not, um, possibly coming over to the United States or to Australia in that process if they were interested in becoming a part of this whole vision that Australia, United States, United Kingdom is coming up with, and being a part of that effort.
So yeah, so there are lots of opportunities here because Australia recognizes they don't have the people with the knowledge. It's really comes down to, I mean, there's a few dozen of us, I think. It's grown. Um, but like, I mean, I actually a couple days ago I was out having drinks with one of my buddies from Naval Reactors, who is working for a company supporting the ASC, which is the Australian Submarine Corporation. It's a publicly owned, privately operated company. They build the submarines for Australia. They build and maintain the submarines. So think like a private-ish shipyard. So like a blend between, say, an electric boat and Portsmouth Naval Shipyard kind of type entity. They are actively recruiting people with those kinds of skills. Companies like BAE Systems, which is the big shipbuilder for the United Kingdom, is actively recruiting people. The Australian Submarine Agency is actively recruiting people. That's their kind of their version of Program Executive Officer Submarines meets a little bit of Naval Reactors from their programmatic side meets Subforce, all rolled up into one entity staffed by a 3-star. There's lots of opportunities, right? There's also private entities. I got hired by UBH Group and immediately subcontracted to a company called ALARP to support them and the work that they are doing. So there are lots of opportunities out there for sailors that are getting out or about to get out to get into support AUKUS, specifically in Australia. It is challenging from a security clearance perspective, as well as from a like a visa perspective. So it's not quick. My wife and I knew that we were coming to Australia about 9 months before we actually got on the plane to fly out here. So it's not
Wow.
quick. It
Yeah.
takes time.
You mind explaining just a little bit more of that, like what is involved with, I guess, getting either you said a visa, like a work visa, or just straight up, moving to Australia for personal reasons or whatever. I'm not sure how that would work if somebody wanted to do that.
So there, like Australia has
You
a very
generalize it.
yeah, Australia has a very complex uh, immigration program for their visas. So I mean, a lot of them are age dependent. So age 45 becomes a challenge, like to go for permanent residency. That's just one of the things in there.
Wow.
So yeah, but it's like student visas, on the other hand, like they love young people. So if you're coming over, age 24, coming over under GI Bill, you actually could probably get over there pretty easily. A young lady that she's from Sellafield, which is a nuclear waste site in the United Kingdom, that came over under a student tourist weird visa. It was an annual visa you had to renew annually. So she came over and she got a job working for ASC, right? So there's opportunities. Like for my wife's company, we're on a 4-year visa. So some are annual, some are 4-year. Depending on the visa, it takes more time than others. And ours, once we got through everything and got the go-ahead with her company, it really took about 2 months to get through the visa process. But it's things like you got to get fingerprints done with the FBI. You have to get background investigations with every state you've lived in the past X number of years, as well as the FBI. So there's a lot of things you have to get done in preparation. So it becomes challenging. And, I learned that the post office and FBI have actually a really good partnering relationship for those through trial and error.
That's a good way to put a trial and error.
Yeah.
We kind of already alluded to as well the members of the Royal Australian Navy who are going through the training pipeline. And if I'm not mistaken, I think also some of their training will have them on U.S. Navy, right, submarines as part of the qualification process once they go through the pipeline. So a lot of the sailors who, possibly even watching now, have, Royal Australian Navy shipmates. The kind of pathway when it comes to enlisted and officer and how you, even get commissioned in the Royal Australian Navy, you have some familiarity with it. If you could kind of just highlight some of the differences between those two services, maybe it's just some interesting points.
Yeah. So I'm going to refer to it as the Commonwealth system. And I could speak because I've gotten to know a former assistant engineer that served on several nuke boats in Royal Navy. I will probably stump this up. By the way, that's Australian for screw it up. I will probably mess this up, but so and the Royal Australian Navy follows the same principle just without nuclear. So they have three flavors of officers on their vessels. So you have ship drivers. They go through their training and they are pure ship drivers. That's all they do. They show up as sub lieutenants, which is equivalent to ensigns, and all they do is they drive ships, and they make their pathway up. And it's like they do their JO tour, and they do a couple of them. Like they don't do tours as long as we do, so they may do several submarines, and they'll do. I think their department head equivalent is actually XO, and so they'll do a couple of boats, and they will go back and forth between the submarine and surface navy. Royal Navy's a little different, but Royal Australian Navy, they can go back and forth. Then they have weapons engineers. So they are pure, all they do is weapons stuff, right? They may assist with, say, like sonar, periscope operations, stuff like that, support the bridge team, but they don't qualify to drive the vessel. And then they have engineers. And engineers on Royal Australian Navy submarines, because there's not as big of a need in the engine room, because both things are operated in the control room, they're going to be in the control room supporting. But in the Royal Navy, their engineers stand watch in the engine room. Like they stand what they call as the A1, which is their equivalent of engineering officer of the watch, and that's all they do. Like they have several jobs that are kind of aligned a little bit with our US. Like they have kind of it's a medical and radcon type officer, and then they have an electrical, and they have a mechanical, and they have one under training. So they have four officers in the engine room. Then they have an assistant engineer, and then they have an engineer. The engineer, by the way, is the number 2 guy on the ship. He is senior to the XO on a Royal Navy vessel because of the nuclear nature of that. And it's typically a lieutenant commander that's about to make commander or commander. And that's like their big ticket to make 06 in the Royal Navy. And then they have 2 rates. They have mechanics and electricians. And then the way that the Royal Navy staffs, and I would imagine this is how the Royal Australian Navy will manage it, is that you show up and you qualify your D band. And that would be, I'm going to use a Virginia-class submarine for an example. The D band is engine room lower level for your mechanic and reactor electrician for your ET/EM. And that's the only thing you qualify on that first boat. And that's all you stand is that watch for that first boat. And then it's rank driven before you can go to the next level. So when you advance and you come back to a submarine, you would then qualify band C, which would be electrical operator for the wire rates, and it would be engine room upper level for the machinist rate, for the machinist mates. And then go back. And by the way, by the time they reach petty officer, which is kind of like first class, then they would qualify their band B, which would be reactor operator / pulse plant operator or engine room supervisor. And that's what they would stand. And they would be a chief. Most of them there would be a few petty officers and mostly chiefs stand that. And then the senior enlisted on the watch team is the A2, which is a senior chief, and which is the equivalent of engineering watch supervisor. On a Royal Navy submarine, they actually have 5 watchstanders in maneuvering, with the A1, the officer, and the A2 standing watch in maneuvering. And then they have a throttleman, reactor operator, and electrical operator. Their throttleman is roving. They can rove. And so the reactor operator and electrical operator can adjust bells if need be. And they don't have an AEA or reactor electrician. That's what the throttleman does. But they have a more automated maneuvering system. But they have the same numbers on a PWR2 reactor, which is what the Royal Navy uses right now. But yeah, so it's a very interesting. They use a little more seniority with it. I don't know what the Royal Australian Navy is going to use, but I would imagine that's the system they're going to follow. I think it makes a lot more sense because it's the system they're familiar with.
You talked about a lot of different things that I either like think is cool or think is not cool based off of my
Yes.
Man, that would be just to wait to qualify engineering watch supervisor to be like your 3rd or 4th time on a submarine. Like, holy cow, that'd be crazy.
I get the operationally, I get the benefit of it though. You're literally a subject matter expert on like whatever your space is. So I mean, you get really, really good at your job. I mean, at least you get the opportunity to get really, really good at your job. And I assume As far as operations go, I see it probably works really well, would be my guess.
Yeah, I mean, if that was incorporated into something like us, I don't know. I'm sure that would totally make a change on, like, retention and, like, how people planned their Navy career, because if they've only, went to 1 boat or 2 boats and they're only, like, mid-level qualified because 'cause they're not, ranked high enough or whatever, uh, that would be much different. You would have to plan your whole career much differently.
They also do a lot shorter tours than our enlisted sailors. So, imagine spending 2 or 3 years as opposed to 4 to 5 years, right? So it'd be a lot different.
Right.
It would suck to be injured below level for 4.5 years, but 2 years, right? If that's the only watch station
Yes,
you
it would.
qualify,
I know some guys. I know some guys who have been. It's obviously because of their own personal issues, but yeah, can
yeah.
imagine if that was just everyone. Yeah, that would definitely suck.
The other thing that's interesting is they're officers, right? So you've got basically one guy that's in quals, and then you have 3 guys that have qualified, and they may be they're one will probably be on their first tour, a couple on their second tour. Your assistant engineer is on his like third tour, right? So right now, if you go onto a submarine, who are the guys standing watch? It's guys who have a year or less in the Navy for the most part, right?
Yeah, the JOs, yeah.
Yeah, right. Because where do we send
Yeah.
them? We send them back to the engine room for a year to go get turned into
Exactly.
meat puppets
Yep.
for the nukes. But now imagine if your officers like you get really 6 months of a meat puppet for a new guy, and all of a sudden, wait, this guy knows stuff now, and he's one, right? So like you can
Hmm.
really manage them a lot better. So it's just an interesting change in the way that they operate from the Royal Navy compared to the U.S. Navy.
I wonder how their qualifications go too, because I mean, obviously, if you don't have 15 qual cards when you first show up, you just have 4. That would be so much
Yeah.
easier to manage. There's pros and cons.
Yeah, there are pros and cons. Yeah.
Mark, the things that's been really at the back of my mind here, just waiting for us to start asking questions about, is living in Australia. I wanna understand you and your experiences with Australia. I'll start off by asking, what's it like living there right now? Like housing situation, like climate, like is there differences between the United States? Are you like battling snakes at your front door? Like what's going on?
I I have not seen a snake yet. So even though
What?
Australia has like 7 of the top 10 most venomous snakes on the planet, I have not seen a snake yet. I also have not seen a crocodile because I don't live anywhere close to where crocodiles live. I have seen, I'll go with thousands of kangaroos, um, and dozens of
Wow.
emus. So it depends on where you're at. So like where I live outside of Perth. So Perth is the capital city for Western Australia, the state. And I live about 15 minutes due west. So about halfway between Perth and the Indian Ocean. Um, very populated, not a lot of kangaroos in the city. But traveling down south, my wife and I, we went to, there's a big Australianism. They do farm stays. That's a really popular thing in Australia is to go to farms to hang out and just exist in a farm. There are farms dedicated to that. That's just a tourist thing they do here. It was a lot of fun, but driving down, we saw heaps and heaps of kangaroo. I think the term is gang. It's a gang of kangaroos, and we saw a couple of flocks of emus driving
A
down.
gang of kangaroos.
Yeah, I believe that's the term.
So are those farm kangaroos or are they like wild kangaroos?
They're wild kangaroos. I've yet to see a farm kangaroo. Um, but
Hmm.
I went to
Thousands of them?
Canberra.
Dang, that's a
Yeah.
lot of kangaroos
Well,
out there.
so I went to Canberra. This is where I really saw the thousands. So I went to Canberra, which is their version of Washington D.C., and I went to drive to a small town to speak to the city council called Forbes. It's about a 3-hour drive north. I saw gang after gang after gang of kangaroo, and the kangaroos are not afraid of cars, so you can imagine, you know, 30-kilo kangaroo, 70-pound kangaroo, gets hit by a car. There were lots of dead ones too that I saw. So I probably saw dozens of dead kangaroos, and then just you literally
Oh
just look
wow.
up. Oh, there's another. I mean, it was just kangaroos all over the place. One of the things that's interesting is that you can buy kangaroo at the grocery stores for pet food and for steaks if you want to buy kangaroo steaks. Kangaroo is actually pretty good. It's lean, so you gotta cook it just right. Kangaroo is good. If you like Mexican food, sorry, there's no such thing as good Mexican in Australia. It's trash. Um,
No. Yeah, you're kind of leading in one of the other questions I was going to ask was how's the food and like what's the casual cuisine out there? What's common?
Indian food and Asian foods are very common just because of our proximity. Like we live within walking distance of an Asian restaurant of an Indian restaurant that serves incredible Indian food. So we go there at least once a month. I mean, Nepalese food, Moroccan, like just lots of cultural, just no Mexican food. And they do have some Mexican. It's just garbage. One thing that's interesting though is that we just walk in and get on a waiting list at a restaurant. You get reservations here. That's just common. Is reservations and then typically a la carte for
Mm.
everything. Um, uh, there's there's no Burger Kings in Australia. They're Hungry Jacks. It's the same restaurant. Um, yeah. And I will say this: Aussies can cook some chips as they call them. We call them fries, but they know how to cook some
Hmm.
fry up some potatoes. They are really good at that. And they have this amazing seasoning called chicken salt. It has no chicken. It's like designed for chicken flavoring. It's like the Australian version of the Red
Yeah.
Robin seasoning mix, only 10 times better. So like, yeah,
Wow.
we put that on everything. We literally give it away as Christmas gifts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that is that like the name of like the company that makes it, or just like the type of season, like chicken
it's
salt,
the
and like a
seasoning.
bunch of different like
Yeah,
companies make?
it's just called chicken salt. There's several companies that make it. Um, and then
Gotcha.
and then culturally, the other thing that's funny are the knockoff versions of similar products. So like
Hmm.
walking through and there was like it looked like a Starbucks, but it was like Star Field or something like that, and
Mm.
it's Smith's potato chips instead of Lay's potato chips, um, and the colors are different too. So like salt and vinegar is blue, it's purple, it's like a pinkish purple here. So it's like you go. My wife and I joke that Australia looks like the United States if you squint. Um, so yeah. And then the other thing that's really weird is that we're in the middle of winter right now. Before we started talking, we were just getting dumped on with rain. It doesn't ever snow here in Perth, but the temperatures get single digits Celsius, so like 40s. So it's cold and rainy,
Yeah.
but yeah, so weather-wise different. Building construction is very different too. So where we do stick builds, they do like brick and mortar style. So lots of concrete. All the walls have to have rounded corners so you don't like bust open your head if you were to trip and fall in the house because it's legit concrete. Um, so yeah, so like my office gets relatively cold because I don't have air conditioning in here, and in the middle of winter, the thermal capacity of those bricks is a lot more than our cheap, you know, paper and plaster and fiberglass insulation walls in the U.S. So
Yeah.
it takes a lot longer to build stuff too. So housing is a lot more expensive.
What about the driving? How long did it take you to get used to driving there?
It took me a good month before I was no longer petrified, and it took me about six
Hmm.
months before I was just like, I'll just go get in the car. Like I literally would like, all right, 2 kilometer walk. Yeah, it's easier to walk it than drive it. And that's the other thing is that the cities are laid out much more conducive to walking. So like I live a couple blocks from a grocery store. I live within a kilometer of 4 grocery stores. Um, so it's really easy to walk places to get things done. Public transportation here is excellent. If you talk to people in Perth, like our public transportation sucks. We can't just use our credit cards. We have to go get a pass to go use the public transport here. And I'm like, you have public transport, which is way better than what I had. Um,
Right.
so yeah,
Exactly.
like it's easier for me to just hop on the bus and take the bus in than to drive into the city. Like it's faster, it's easier and cheaper because I have to pay for parking.
Yeah, I'm convinced that's just the case everywhere else, but in major, not outside of major cities in America. 'Cause I've been into Europe, to a couple countries, Portugal, Spain, and the public transportation is just amazing. like getting around. But outside of like the big cities here, and even sometimes in the big cities here, yeah, it's just like you have to have a car, so it sucks.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast. What we're gonna do is Mark has got a lot more insight into like his life transitioning out of the military and his commercial nuclear experience. So we'll have another episode of that. It'll come out later than this, so y'all can tune into that. But you've given us a lot of good insight into what you're doing in Australia, AUKUS, your current company, and how the future looks for the United States, Australia, and the UK. So I really appreciate you for coming on the podcast, man.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to our next conversation too.
Appreciate you, Mark.
All right, we'll see you in the next one.